Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for today's webinar. We're going to get started right away, and we are recording this session. Today's webinar is Taking Charge of Your Mental Health in College and Beyond. I'm Stephanie Maurice Beeson from PsyChi headquarters, and I'm very excited to be able to welcome you today. I will just briefly introduce PsyChi and our speaker today, Dr. Lauren Yang, and I'll address a couple housekeeping issues, and then I'll pass it right over to Dr. Yang. As the International Psychology Honor Society, PsyChi supports our members to study and share psychology in ways that further our understanding, deepen meaningful connections with others, and lead to healthier lives. As part of this mission, we endeavor to promote self-care and mental wellness for all, which is why we're bringing you this webinar today as part of our campaign to support mental health advocacy. Another part of this campaign is a scholarship we are building to support PsyChi members studying mental health advocacy. So if you're interested in learning more about that, I encourage you to visit psychi.org and look for the Christian Ladd Hall Scholarship for Mental Health Advocacy. I'd also like to encourage you to visit psychi.org to learn more about the many benefits of lifetime membership, including research opportunities, awards, grants, and scholarships, and publication opportunities. And we will also post the recording of this webinar on psychi.org in case you need to leave early or if you'd like to view it again in the future or share it with your friends. I know Dr. Yang is going to share a lot of really wonderful information that you might want to revisit. And I would like to thank the Depression and Bipolar Support Alliance, DBSA, for partnering with us on this webinar and bringing us our presenter today, Dr. Lauren Yang. Dr. Yang is the president of the DBSA Associate Board and as well as a past Young Adult Council Vice Chair of DBSA. Dr. Lauren has drawn upon her 11 years of lived experiences with bipolar disorder to support peers with mood disorders. She is a licensed clinical psychologist who has contributed to articles, podcasts, and panels on emotional wellness as a graduate student, therapist, and Asian American young adult. Dr. Yang's work can also be seen in International Bipolar Foundation, BP Hope Magazine, Grad School Femturing, and Psych Explained with Dr. Jack. We're very lucky to have her with us today. She has a wonderful presentation to share with us. We will keep the audience on mute for the presentation. If you have any questions, please enter them into the chat and we will leave time at the end to address those questions. I'll moderate the chat and make sure that Dr. Yang sees your questions if you have anything to enter. And now, without further ado, I will pass the mic to Dr. Lauren Yang.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. Thank you, PsyChi, for co-hosting this webinar with myself. As Stephanie mentioned, I am coming to you from Depression and Bipolar Support Alliance and very excited to be here with you all to talk about how to take charge of your mental health in college and beyond. So let's go ahead and get into it. So just to give you a roadmap of what you can expect for today, I'm going to give a bit of background about my journey with bipolar disorder and DBSA. I'll relate some personal examples to further illustrate the points of how it is that you can, for example, identify early signs for the intervention and prevention of mood disorders, especially during college age years. And I will also be going over resources where you can find those on campus and in the community. And then finally, how it is that you can practice self-advocacy, especially when you're facing challenges that are unique and specific to young adults during that age period. So again, as Stephanie mentioned, I am currently a licensed clinical psychologist. I work for Kaiser Permanente. And I came to DBSA back in 2018 and first joined the Young Adult Council. That was around when I was in my first year of graduate school. And prior to that, I was diagnosed with bipolar II disorder at age 22. That's when I was just coming up on my graduation from college over at UCLA. I experienced my first hypomanic episode shortly after my first major depressive episode and thereafter. So in addition to my lived experiences, I also have clinical training from my years in grad school. I was at an outpatient specialty clinic for bipolar disorder over in New York City, And I have experience working with college students also in university counseling centers, both while I was in New York and over here in California, where I'm zooming you into you from. And I'll be talking to you about some early signs that you can look out for so that you can know how you can intervene and how you can prevent the onset of a mood disorder. So getting into some risk factors, the transition to adulthood is challenging. There's going to be a lot of change, disruptions. Typically young adults, we're defining that as ages 18 to 29, are experiencing many changes like moving out on your own for the first time, finding your first job, getting used to college life and managing multiple demands with classes, work, and your relationships, building relationships with whether it be with friends, significant others. So for myself, I found that when I had my first hypomanic episode, it was in the springtime. So we do see that seasonal changes can be a trigger or a risk factor for the onset of mood disorders. Definitely disruptions in routine can be another one as well. So as we very well know, college has a lot of opportunities for disruptions in that, with studying late at night, parties or socializing or social events, things like that. So something to keep an eye out for as you're navigating college life. Major life transitions. So again, whether you're moving out and living on your own for the first time, away from family, entering new relationships. For myself, I was also starting to end my relationship with my boyfriend at the time, in addition to graduation coming up. So I think those might have been some triggers or for myself during my last year of college. And then any sort of interpersonal stress, or basically, stress that you're having in your relationships with friends, family, classmates, roommates, things like that, right? So we often say that routine promotes emotion regulation. That's actually one of the underlying interventions in a therapy approach called interpersonal and social rhythm therapy that was developed for bipolar disorder. But for really any mood dysregulation, routine can be very helpful with promoting regulation of that. And in addition, as we know, our relationships are a big part of our lives, our day-to-days. So social support, having really strong social support, can help with the stabilization of our mood as well. So things to keep an eye out for. And then what do the symptoms themselves actually look like? So I'm breaking them down into categories, and within each category, you can take a look at either end of the spectrum. So I'm going to describe those that are more on the depressive end, and then those that can be more on the hypomanic or manic end, or simply more elevated mood state. So sleep issues are a big one. If you find that you're oversleeping, you're constantly fatigued, even after sleeping, like say 10, 11, 12 hours in the night, taking multiple naps during the day, that can be a sign of an onset of a mood disorder on the depressive end. And on the opposite end, so for myself, I was sleeping like 2 to 3 hours a night, still feeling energized, ready to go each day for multiple days on end. So if you find that there's a decreased need for sleep and you're feeling energized after those little nights of sleep, that's something to be on the lookout for possibly a hypomanic or manic episode. Appetite changes. So if you're feeling not too hungry, you're eating less. I know my appetite gets impacted when I'm stressed in general. So if I'm finding that starts to get extended to multiple days, I'm really not eating that much, that can, again, be a sign of on the depressive end. Or even, if you're finding that you're insatiable, you're starting to overeat, more than just emotional eating, like you're eating when you're happy or sad, but you're really starting to overindulge in eating more than your regular meals a day. Those can be things to look out for on either end. Basically any change in your appetite. Your activity level. I think withdrawal from others is a huge sign for on the depressive end. You know, when you're not feeling too great, I think that makes sense that you're not really going to be too inclined to want to hang out with folks or to respond to texts or things like that. But if you're finding it's, again, going for days on end, it's just really hard to bring yourself to socialize, bring yourself out to meet people. Even if your movement starts to get slowed, you start to feel sluggish, you start to feel heavy in your body. That's another thing to keep in mind. And on the other end, if you're finding you're driven to produce, you're driven to create a lot of projects, you have a lot of, like, I'll get into the ideas part, but if you find that you're acting on a bunch of ideas for projects, you're feeling restless, it's hard to stay still, that's another sign to look out for as well. So looking at your activity level, your energies, and then looking at your thought patterns, if you find that they're tending to be negative, pessimistic, whether about yourself, like negative views of yourself, negative views about others, your relationships, or about the world in general, like the state of the world, like your outlook on life is just very dark and negative, you know, starting to get into where, you know, safety becomes a concern. That's another warning sign. On the other end, if you're starting to feel what's called inflated, like you're starting to have a greater sense of self, like you're more grandiose, like you feel like you have a greater sense of importance, your mind starts racing with a lot of ideas, it just feels like it's hard to keep up with your thoughts even. So I know for myself, when I was in the hypomanic episode, like I was coming up with ideas, like 60 plus ideas in one night for a self-help blog that I thought was going to change the world, thought it was going to be revolutionary, wanted to write a book even, so I was checking out a lot of books from the library, trying to do quote-unquote research for this project. So that kind of thing, where I was really starting to think like, okay, I need to make these things happen. Your level of interest is another category, so thinking that or feeling, you know, activities are no longer enjoyable, what you used to like to do feels like no fun, like there's not kind of like a spark to life so much anymore. Or if you're finding that you're just interested in a bunch of new pursuits, projects, like you're very goal-oriented, like you want to accomplish a lot of different things, like a lot of things are fascinating, even more interesting, that could be a sign of hypomania or mania. And then finally, safety concerns. So if you're starting to feel hopeless, feeling burdensome in your thoughts, starting to go basically towards the way of suicidal ideation or thoughts about suicide or death or harming yourself in some way, that's something to definitely really should be seeking additional help and support, especially at that point. And then in the hypomania or mania, you might start to be taking more risks, acting impulsively. I was spending a lot more, like recklessly, getting myself into debt. So, you know, there can be more extreme examples of, you know, people maybe having more sex with partners unprotected, or going out and doing more like reckless driving, things like that can be more extreme examples. But for me, it was, you know, definitely on the spending side, or I was, you know, racking up a lot of debt. So things like that, where your safety is starting to become a concern, is especially something to look out for as well. Okay, and then so questions you might want to ask yourself: are these just are these mood symptoms, or am I being just quote unquote moody? Is this just sort of a mood swing? But once you're able to recognize the signs, then you know what it is that you're tracking. It can be helpful to keep a log of these things, whether just be on like a notepad or like the Notes app in your phone, and then starting to notice if there's a pattern. So these are some questions you might want to consider, like how might these have first started, or what might have triggered the onset of these symptoms? What are some stressors that might have exacerbated or brought on these symptoms? So for myself, I think with graduation coming up at the end of my 4th year in college, the prospect of entering quote unquote the real world, I think might have been part of my triggers. I was having relationship problems with my boyfriend at the time that eventually did lead to the breakup of our 6-year relationship. And then, like I said, spring time from fall and winter to the change to spring has tended to be a trigger for me with my mood episodes. So things you might want to think about with that. Secondly, how long are these lasting at a time? So I think people think like throughout the day, okay, if my mood goes up and down, like that's a mood episode, or, you know, sure, that can be considered a mood swing, but really want to be thinking like, is this lasting nearly every day, most of the day, for multiple days on end? So technically by the Diagnostic Statistical Manual that we use to diagnose disorders, so for hypomanic episodes, you know, the mood symptoms should be lasting at least 4 days or so, and for a major depressive episode, you're looking at lasting at least 2 weeks at a time. So if these are just kind of like hours or less than a day, and then like 1 day here and there might not be considered an episode, but you want to definitely be looking into like, okay, is this becoming episodic? Is this happening, you know, for days at a time with like some brief or, you know, some intermittent periods of what we call euthymia, where it's like your baseline. So it's good to also know what your baseline of functioning is. So when you're thinking about how is your daily level of functioning, are you being impaired in some way? Is it harder to get to classes? Are you, again, like kind of sinking your finances into the tank? Like, is it, are those getting impacted? Are your relationships with people getting impacted? I was starting to get pretty verbally aggressive with others during my hypomanic episode. So I was definitely like lashing out, not just at friends, roommates, and family, but, you know, complete strangers that I was out like in the grocery lines, standing in line with, and things like that, where it was really starting to become noticeable and become a problem, obviously. So looking at the impairment and the severity of your symptoms would be important to be thinking about too. So with that, where can you find resources both on campus and in the community when you start to notice these signs and you're starting to notice a pattern? It's not just kind of one-offs, it's starting to feel episodic. So first on campus, you definitely want to look for where your university counseling or wellness center is. I fortunately was able to first still be able to access my university counseling center when I was having my first hypomanic episode. So I went to go see a counselor, specifically a psychologist, over at mine, and I was even able to get medications from psychiatrists there at my center. So if yours is able to offer that, something to consider too, therapy in addition to medications. Accessibility and disability resource centers. So those can be under slightly different names depending on the campus, but basically, you know, once you get a proper diagnosis or, you know, you start getting a treatment plan going as well from your mental health provider, whether it be at a university counseling center or whether it be a provider out in the community, you want to then be able to talk with these kind of resource centers so that you can get accommodations if needed. Namely, you know, if you need extra time on your assignments, or you need, deadlines extended, or you need extra time on exams, things like that, that they can help support you in getting with the proper documentation and certifying statements from your medical providers, basically. So that's another resource. And then if you want to look into student organizations, Active Minds is a common one. There's definitely multiple chapters across the nation. I know my campus had an Active Minds chapter on campus, and so they're mental health focused, you know, not only just for getting support and help for yourself, but if you want to look into becoming more of an advocate, you want to be an ally, you want to get more into volunteer efforts with mental health, then those would be organizations to look into. There's some peer-led support at times. I know some campuses have like mentorship or peer-led counseling, or maybe not called counseling, but, you know, peers who are trained and who are specialized to support you as a peer with your mental health. So that could be something to look into as well on your campus. In the community, are you able to look for online directories. For example, there's Thriving Campus that is partnered with some campuses. So those are online directories that have therapists, counselors that specifically work with young adults, or specifically those who are in college, that kind of population. So they know, the kind of challenges that you're dealing with, what kind of unique developmental challenges also you could be going through at that time as well. Inclusive Therapists is another helpful online directory that in their search filters, you can select people based on their identities, on their specialties, folks who, maybe you might feel like would be a better fit for you according to those kind of filter searches. So that's another resource as well. Secondly, knowing that therapy can be costly, it is costly and can be cost prohibitive, you might want to look into local training clinics in your area. So for my school, for example, we had an in-house clinic that we offered services for a much reduced discounted rate. And we were under supervision. So at these training clinics, the therapists, the doctoral students who are providing services, they all are under supervision by a licensed provider. So that could be a low cost, more effective option to look into. Private and group practices, they could sometimes do sliding scale, which means that they adjust their fees accordingly based on your income, your financial situation. So private practices with individual providers or group practices with multiple therapists, they could possibly offer that as an option, or you could ask about that when looking for their services. And then local chapters of mental health organizations, so not just DBSA. Of course, being a major one out there, we are the primary one for those who have mood disorders. National Alliance on Mental Illness is a more broad, more generalized mental health organization for around mental health. And then Mental Health of America is another one that they usually have local chapters and you can become more involved in, volunteer for. And DBSA for sure has peer-led support groups. That's one of our main programming resources that we offer to the community. So you would want to look into things like that either NAMI or MHA could also have as well. Okay, and then going into self-advocacy, how can you practice this when you are faced with certain unique challenges during young adulthood? So looking into, what are the unique challenges in the first place, right? This is definitely by no means an exhaustive list, but just recalling also my own time back then when I was dealing with that first hypomanic episode, first major depressive episode while graduating college and trying to establish my independence, trying to just get out there on my own. So first, I know there was a lack of knowledge that I had, at least, not just as far as my own mental health, what to look out for, the signs, the symptoms, but even what resources could have been available to me. So fortunately, again, I was able to access my University Counseling Center as the first point of intervention. But when I graduated and when I had to look for therapists using my insurance, trying to find those who were in network, which, oftentimes that insurance portal was out of date or people wouldn't respond back. People would say that they were full, even they weren't taking new patients. So I had to learn how to navigate, not only finding someone who was available, someone who was in network. I actually ended up even seeking services with a group practice for my psychiatrist and my therapist who were out of network. So I had to learn how to submit forms for reimbursement using what are called super bills that they provide you, basically an itemized list of the services they provided along with your diagnosis. But so I had to learn those kind of things, and that was a very challenging, that was an additional challenge on top of just trying to, navigate my mental health symptoms at the time. So like I said, college presents many opportunities for destabilization. There's a lot of disruptions in the routine that come up. So knowing for yourself what can be the trigger points, what could be the risk factors, what could be your stressors, what tends to derail you in your mental health is an important point to keep in mind for yourself. And then, so when you know what signs, when you are deviating from baseline, when you are, it's not just like a kind of mood swing or just like an off day, then you know, like especially amid changes and transitions that you go through in life, then you'll know, okay, these are not just one-offs, or these are, you know, pretty consistent signs. There is a pattern. There is a duration of these signs lasting too that you want to look out for. And then finally, the point about independence was a huge point for me that I was trying to, like I said, establish during that time. So not quite financially able to support myself just yet. Right after college, I did have to rely on my parents for support with like paying for my therapy sessions, for my med management sessions, which I know, you know, necessarily isn't the case for everyone. So that's something that I had a privilege that I was able to tap into and access for myself in getting early intervention, early help with my mental health. But, you know, so knowing again that therapy can be cost prohibitive, looking at those community resources that I mentioned earlier that could be more low cost. Living situation could be uncertain too. So from changing roommates year to year in the dorms, moving to the apartments from the dorms while I was still in college, then moving back home to be back with family. Like those were all changes that definitely disrupted and, you know, were things that exacerbated my mental health, like I said. So things, so, you know, with a lot of the change and those transitions that can happen in those areas, you want to find ways that you can support yourself. So you're not adding on to the stress, you're not exacerbating, you're not further, hopefully destabilizing, you know, your mental health state in those ways. So, but it is a challenge, right? Like, I think that's something that I wasn't prepared for by any means when graduating and when trying to navigate like my early 20s and even my mid 20s before starting graduate school. I think just the process of trying to find those things out for myself and figure out what worked for me, that added on to the stress in and of itself too. So recognizing all that, and it speaks even more so to the importance of routine, like I said, social support, finding the resources that will bolster and provide that safety net for you during especially tumultuous times like that. So. Just some additional challenges to note that I came across too in my early 20s with the first episodes of bipolar disorder. So I had a couple of instances where like one of the first psychiatrists that I saw, she doubted my side effect reactions, my adverse reactions to a mood stabilizer that she first prescribed to me, and didn't really believe me that I had like body aches and pains, that I had to go to the emergency room even because the aches and pains and then a full body rash had developed all over me in reaction to that. So I had to, not only was I just very upset by that in the first place, but I then had to ask for a change in psychiatrist at my university counseling center because I didn't feel like she was being very supportive towards me, unfortunately. But you know, that definitely wasn't the last time, unfortunately, that I did have to advocate, you know, for myself and finding a provider who was a good fit for me, who was going to be supportive, responsive towards me. I had to do that actually just recently, literally earlier this year with another psychiatrist. So even, you know, 11 years later, that's something I still have to learn how to navigate for myself. And then another challenge was when I went to go pick up that mood stabilizer from the CVS local pharmacy that did end up giving me the, that I had a bad reaction to. The pharmacy tech who saw me crying the first time that I tried to pick up the meds, I didn't know what insurance information was needed to be able to pick up the medication so it wouldn't cost a bunch of money, essentially, without it being insured. I didn't know what all that information was needed. So when I finally came back and was able to pick up the med and got it the cost reduced and whatnot, she said to me, "Oh, no crying today," when she saw me come back to pick it up. So, comments like that where, I always say when in other presentations or in other panels of how words matter, the language we use when talking about mental health and when we talk with others who we don't know what they might be going through, but they could very well be, handling and navigating their own mental health challenges. So it's very important to be careful about how it is that we, just are mindful in talking to others around mental health. So those are some initial experiences I had that come to mind with that. And so with self-advocacy, it does take practice and patience. That's something, again, like even in my early 30s now, I still feel like I have to exercise and practice and be able to use for myself. And it is like a muscle. It's like the more that you use it, the more that it does become a little bit more comfortable. You do become more used to it. But certainly it's not without its challenges, right? And it is a journey that you don't have to go through alone. Ideally, again, you would be able to find those people, those providers, those resources who would be your safety net amid these changes. So just some basic strategies that I fall back on when thinking about self-advocacy is knowing yourself. You are your best advocate. You know yourself the best. So you know your baseline, especially if you start tracking that and you start noticing what the signs and the deviations are. You know what your risk factors can be. Those are different from person to person. You know what signs to look out for yourself. So even though there's like the diagnostic list of symptoms for major depression, for bipolar disorder, each person's presentation for each of these disorders can look a little different, or at least the amalgamation, the clusters of signs that can present in someone can look a little different. I know when I tell people that I have bipolar 2 disorder, I do get some surprise reactions from people, and they think I'm quote unquote too high functioning to be someone who has bipolar disorder, but that is something I have lived with for the past 11 years. And even earlier this year, I had to go through some med changes to get some rapid cycling down under control. So all in all, just to say that you know yourself best, and using that as your starting point, and then using your voice, which that takes so much of the practice of, especially if you haven't been shown or been modeled or used to being able to use that for yourself, or even if you use your voice to speak out for yourself before but haven't had maybe many positive reinforcements of that, or it feels like it'd be risky, because it can feel risky, and you worry about maybe what reactions you might get for that. Like with a psychiatrist I mentioned, where she doubted, my side effect reactions, it's still very nerve-wracking, or it still can feel invalidating a lot of times, in spite of using your voice. So hopefully with the support from others, like from people who are receptive, who will listen to you, that is also an important part of that piece. And that leads into another strategy of finding your community, finding your people, whether that be on campus, in your local community, online. I know I had to look for a lot of that for myself online, especially, during the pandemic, that was the only way to be able to be in community with people. But yeah, it's, especially if you're in an area where maybe it doesn't feel like there's a lot of diversity, or doesn't feel like there's a lot of resources at hand or in person available to you, then being a little creative and looking towards online and seeing where you can find people like that who can be supportive and listen to you and support you. Okay, so I did run through that more quickly than I anticipated, so please feel free to let me know if you want me to review anything, or if I can answer any clarifying questions about any of this. But so that brings me to just to summarize all these points that I've brought up about the early signs, resources, and self-advocacy. So first, know your risk factors. Again, what are the triggers, the stressors, whether it be in your environment, your daily social life, just physically, mentally within your own self, what could be signs. So noticing a pattern, again, like I said, in the signs and symptoms, things that seem to be a little off and are lasting in duration, not just one-offs. Assessing the extent and impact that these changes, these signs, these symptoms are having on you. So thinking about the level of impairment, the severity that these things are having on you. So whether it be in your relationships, your class schedule, your academic performance, finances. Like I said, that was a big one for me, especially in my younger adult years. So thinking about, okay, how is this looking like and impacting you on the day-to-day? For your resources, know where your campus wellness and accessibility centers are, so that they can further support you with your classes, if you need accommodations with the proper documentation from your mental health providers, and finding support where you can. So using whether like the online directories that I mentioned, Inclusive Therapists, Thriving Campus, or locally, like with the mental health organizations, whether it be on your campus that are student-led or out there in the community like DBSA, NAMI, and MHA. And then finally with self-advocacy, so I always say that self-knowledge is power, knowing yourself best. Like I said, knowing what feels right for you, what feels off for you, what kind of care, what kind of response does feel supportive and empathic for you. Only you can determine that for yourself, and that's ultimately where you can empower yourself in knowing that. And practicing these things with patience, using your voice, speaking out, being able to verbalize and express to what it is that you are having troubles with, what it is that could be helpful. That's something I couldn't articulate for myself in the earlier years with bipolar disorder. That's something that only maybe in the latter half of my time with this condition that I've been able to better articulate, okay, this is what help and support looks like for me. Like I need to be checked in on, like even if I know some of my friends had expressed during that time, like they were unsure, they didn't want to be intrusive or burdensome, but for me, looking back on that time now, like I needed to be checked in on, like even if it was just a text, or even if I wasn't quite up to having a full conversation or wasn't able to describe and explain fully what was going on with me, just having that acknowledgement or that offering of presence from friends and family would have made a huge difference for me in those earlier years. And then taking heart in that you are not alone in going through your mental health journey. It can feel like that a lot of times, especially in maybe the earlier period where you're still kind of figuring things out, or you're not quite sure who to talk to about these things, who might be a safe person, or how to look for the right provider, therapist for yourself. But when you are able to find those things for yourself, it makes a world of a difference. And I know it did for me, and how I'm able to come to you today and talk about it like 11 years later from my first hypomanic episode. So multiple things that played into that for me. But yeah, so that is what I have for my content for today. Again, I did speed through those a bit more quickly than I was anticipating, but I welcome any questions, clarifying, or anything that I can expand on from you all in the audience.
We do have quite a few questions that I can read out from the chat, some anonymous and some in the public chat, but I first just want to say thank you so much for that really wonderful information. Somebody in the chat said, this is so helpful. I wish I had this knowledge when I was in school. And I feel the same way for myself. It's just very, very awesome. And some of the things you were talking about, the uncertainty of all of it in young adulthood just is very, very resonant, whether folks on the call are students themselves right now or teaching students. There's some questions about how to support as a faculty member too. So If you don't mind, Dr. Yang, I will just kind of read them one by one, and then you just let me know when you're ready to go to the next one.
Yeah, sure thing.
Alrighty, so the first one here, okay. What have been some benefits of self-disclosing regarding your diagnosis, and what are the downsides? And do you have any recommendations regarding self-disclosure in school, work, or publicly?
Yes, good question, and one that I get often around self-disclosure for sure. So pros, cons, and recommendations, right? Yeah. So
Yep.
So I talked about this actually in grad school femturing, one of her episodes, in how I navigated self-disclosure during grad school and in my profession, even as an early career psychologist, and even among like my friends and family. So I think about first I guess I'm starting with recommendations first, and I'll go into pros and cons. So I think about what is my relationship with that person who I am thinking about disclosing to. So whether it be a colleague, coworker, supervisor, even friends, family, classmates. And that's something that, I thought, okay, just share. And then, I'll see what the outcome of that might be. Like I kind of was just like being a little less discriminate in that than I could have been at the beginning. I think that was me like trying to exercise and use my voice in the first place, like just trying to get comfortable with like even naming that I have bipolar disorder and to share that with others. But I would say, it is a privilege for anyone to have that kind of information about you. Disclosing your mental health condition is a gift that you can give towards others to help them not only understand you, but also how to support you. But you get to decide and select that for yourself. So thinking about the extent of the relationship, how they kind of prove themselves to be a relatively safe person. If not yet so far, or if you're not quite sure, you can always gauge that for yourself, like kind of put out, feelers or just kind of broach the topic, maybe tentatively like, hey, there's something I want to talk to you about, or there's something really personal and something I've been dealing with. And I'm wondering if I can maybe share some things about that with you. So you don't have to, this is something I talk to with my clients and patients as well, is you don't have to spill your guts out or pour your heart out to anyone, just anyone, first of all, but you can also gauge and moderate how much it is that you're disclosing in the first place. And then secondly, thinking about what is the purpose of your disclosure. So for me at the beginning, a lot of it was to try and help people understand where I'm coming from, for me to better my relationship with them essentially. So especially among my friends, my closer friends who saw my first saw me through my first hypomanic episode, who are still friends with me to this day. And I think about, okay, is this gonna ultimately help them help me? Is this gonna help them understand what it is that I'm going through, and in turn help inform them how it is that they can support me? So again, like I said, that took some time for me to be able to articulate of how it is that I can describe what support looks like for me. So I said, for me, not only checking in, bringing me food during those depressive episodes would have been nice and helpful, or like even if I wasn't able to bring myself to go outside a lot of times, things like that. Or definitely, so on the other side, for the person who you're disclosing this to and you want to explain what would be helpful for you, is like having them not make assumptions either, or what could or could not be helpful for you. I think a lot of people dance around that or get nervous in trying to offer or be that support to others, but just simply asking the first questions of like, what would be helpful or how can I be of help to you, can make, just at least opening up the space to talk about that can make a difference. So pros and cons, pros, like I said, it can help the other person understand you better, maybe even repair a relationship more. Like there are some relationships that unfortunately got burned during my earlier years with the hypomanic episode, when I was irritable and verbally aggressive towards them. So, some of those relationships haven't been salvaged, I would say. So, that was an unfortunate outcome from, one of my episodes. But, so ideally though, like would have loved to repair those relationships by self-disclosing more. Cons can be, I think, for anything personal to us, it can be the disappointment, the rejection, the judgment. Stigma is still very much prevalent, unfortunately, in our society, right? Like as much as, I'm glad that we're having more conversations around mental health and more people out there. I know I have other fellow peer advocates who are actually in this call with me. I noticed Paris is out there in the audience, and folks like herself and myself who are out there advocating about our mental health conditions. We do that because we want others to understand, but then also knowing that it does feel risky and it can feel nerve-wracking to do that. So I just want to recognize that.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
I can read the next one from the chat if you're ready.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. I'm an older student, Gen X, preparing for grad school application season, and I'm in the process of getting a mental health diagnosis, possibly ADHD or non-specific LD bipolar 2/cyclothymia. I'm struggling with understanding whether or not my symptoms constitute a disability and whether I should seek out disability accommodations for taking a GRE, working with disability services at my prospective universities, etc. I'm struggling with not wanting to be one of those people who abuse disability accommodations, but recognizing that I am neurodivergent has shed a light on things that can help me work with rather than against my neurodivergent brain and manage my symptoms. So do you have any advice for
Yes.
disability accommodations?
Yes, definitely. And I can talk about this more from the workplace accommodation standpoint. I didn't really so much access accommodations, definitely not towards the end of my time in undergrad and not even during grad school, that I really tapped into those for myself. To say that my feelings towards having a disability status have and still remain ambivalent, to be fully transparent about that. Like I only just recently, so again, 11 years ago is when this first started for me, and it's only been this year that I finally brought myself to ask for workplace accommodation, or specifically like going on medical leave to be able to tolerate side effects from the medication change that I had to undergo to, again, get on top of the rapid cycling that was happening for me earlier this year. So to say that I hear that, and I really resonate with that, of like it's a difficult feeling and relationship that I myself have with disability status. And so I think, in not knowing fully, I appreciate you sharing a bit more about your situation and your context and what it is that you're going through at this time. And the prospect of like applying to grad school, like I know people have asked me, like, do I check off that box and indicate that I have a disability? Which, first of all, you shouldn't necessarily feel pressured or should have to be required or made to disclose what even that disability is in the first place, not with an employer, not with your school. That should be confidential. It's just, marking that you have either history of or that you have a disability that needs accommodations, if that offers any bit of reassurance. But yeah, like again, for me, that's something I still am struggling and work through, of like that acceptance piece of like, this is a cyclical, episodic condition that I deal with on the day-to-day basis every year, days on end kind of thing. And so I don't know if I'm really answering or getting at your question, but I think just mostly to resonate and empathize with that struggle, and talking with your provider, your therapist or psychiatrist, whomever might be writing that certification for you, could be a helpful conversation to have with them. They could maybe even offer ideas for what that could look like with you. Like my psychiatrist has been collaborative with me and thinking through, okay, what would a medical leave involve and how's that helping me? And fortunately, I have employers who, and a manager who is very understanding and supportive of that, no questions asked. And so, talking with your provider, thinking through first, like, I think another thing that I try to tell myself too is like, do I have to for as much, or do I have to go through this much of a challenge in order to be able to kind of level the playing field, so to speak, with others who aren't neurodivergent or who don't have this mental health condition? Like, that is a very real added layer of our experiences that we have to navigate and work through. And that just, I don't want to call it a handicap, but it does affect and impact our experiences in the way that in which we're able to function on a day-to-day basis and in our respective roles and responsibilities. So hopefully that's helpful.
Thank you. And I'm sure that person feels less alone from your response. So that is really awesome. Another one from the chat. How can teachers support young adults during this process?
Yes. I think thinking about what would have been helpful for me, like from, or no, a couple of professors did do this for me, not with the knowledge or like with me having disclosed to them that I'm even going through some kind of mental health challenge. Like there were some, so in the height of the hypomanic episode, and I was like coming up with the self-help blog ideas, and I was basically not getting to the assignments that I needed to, or definitely not, like my final exam paper was due for one class, and I asked, for an extension, for that paper from that professor, and fortunately, that professor didn't really need too much further explanation. I think I might have alluded to, like, I was dealing with some health challenges at the time, but not specifically mental health. And so I think for teachers to be able to have that understanding, kind of like giving some students benefit of the doubt of like, okay, if they're asking for help or for an extension, I know like there are some students who could be abusing that, I guess, so to speak, but to give them benefit of the doubt, to assume good intentions, that like if they're asking for help, whether it be through an extension or some kind of accommodation, then they must really be needing that and they're trying hard to succeed, in class, and they're having a hard time with that. So I think having, not making assumptions, having openness, understanding, depending on the relationship you might have with students or a particular student who's asking for that, like if you want to be curious and open up a little bit of space for them to be able to, they don't have to share a lot of what's going on with them, or nor should they feel like they have to, but basically opening up and giving space for them to feel like, okay, they can come and talk to you, like whether, if not for like concrete instrumental support and help, at least to help them feel like, they're not going to be reprimanded, or there's not going to be like a punitive response right away, or one of judging or shaming or blaming. I know I talked with Dr. Yvette Martinez in her grad school functioning episode. That one that like really hit home and resonated with her was like the assumption that some professors and teachers can make of like that we're just being lazy. Any of us with like a mental health condition or disability or who are neurodivergent, like that kind of misplaced assumption of like we're being lazy or we're trying to abuse the system, which again, there could be some who are, but at least not having that be the initial maybe mindset or reaction to someone asking for help, and then opening up the space for them to be able to talk about any of it could be helpful too.
Thank you. Ready for another?
Yeah.
Okay, we still have a couple more. You shared a lot about resources that you can find online that can be helpful. Do you have any recommendations for how to know if a group or resource is reputable or trustworthy?
Yeah, that's a good question too. A group or a resource, like a support group, I'm assuming is being asked about. For groups, like the ones with DBSA, like I know that they do train their peer-led group facilitators. Like they literally have to go through a specific training before they're able to facilitate the group. So I think that could be something to look out for, is making sure like who are the ones first of all, who is hosting the groups? Like, is it from a reputable organization, well-known nationally, again, like DBSA, NAMI, or MHA? If it's lesser known, yeah, looking at who it is that's facilitating the groups, like do they have training? Like, if there's someone who's a peer with lived experience, like have they had additional certification or training to be able to talk about, because it's one thing to talk about the lived experiences and another to facilitate a group of folks with similar lived experiences. Like that's its whole skill in and of itself. So I think kind of taking with a grain of salt or being able to discern, who is leading the group, and are they properly trained and have the experience. I think, if you're able to even ask the organization or whoever might be the point contact person who oversees and facilitates the group program, then asking them that specific question, like how are your facilitators trained? Do they have certification? What criteria do you use to select and appoint your group facilitators? A resource, I think making sure that the resource, so like I'm thinking of Very Well Mind or BP Hope as online good like online resources that have a lot of articles and education that can be read about mood disorders. So making sure that they're backed by either scientific, medical experts, or if there's someone speaking from the lived experience, then hopefully there's a little bit of a bio about that person of like them, naming that they're speaking from lived experience and they're a peer advocate. And then also like for them to be disclaiming, like, please do seek the advice of a medical professional, like never take any of the online resources to be like directives or to replace any sort of medical advice, mental health care support. Even on my platform, on my Instagram platform that I provide some educational posts and do some self-disclosing, like none of that should ever be taken as like, okay, that's, instructing you or guiding you or directing you how you should go about your own mental health care. So really, being able to have that in mind too of like, these are educational resources, but really should make sure to talk to a medical or mental health care professional to get your own personalized, care recommendations.
Thank you. That's awesome. That's really helpful.
Yeah.
Okay, let's do one more from the chat and then we can wrap up right at the top of the hour here.
Yeah.
So final question for Dr. Yang. How can parents approach their student if they see many of these warning signs?
Yeah, another great question. I'm trying to think about what I would have liked from my own parents during that time, because out of full transparency, I don't even really talk to mine still too much about my bipolar disorder. I don't think I've even actually named having bipolar disorder out loud to them. I've just kind of alluded to having this mental health condition or this mood disorder, and they don't really ask too much about that. Maybe they think, like similar to my friends during the earlier periods, like they don't want to be intrusive either. They don't want to be burdensome or troublesome or be like stepping on toes or anything. But I think what would have been helpful for me and what I would advise, whether it be parents or teachers or friends, peers, classmates, is just being curious. And what I mean by that is, being able to just pose the question of like, how are you doing really? Not just the kind of in passing, like quick, like, how are you doing? Oh, fine. Yeah, just fine. Can be, I think, prompts like a typical quick surface level response like that, but really showing like through nonverbals too, like you are wanting to know, like, how are they doing? Opening up space is called that too, of being able to let people know like they can come talk to you about something, and validating and affirming, like even saying out loud to them, like, I can only imagine what it is that you must be going through, or I can see that things have been really difficult for you lately, or I can see there's been some changes going on with you, like naming an observation and alluding to that, and then using that to then open up space with them, like, so I'm wondering, and even affirming that like care and concern that is ultimately behind that question too, right? Like, I really care and I'm worried about you. I think that can also help to invite vulnerability, help people feel a little bit safer in being approached, and then like keep just coaxing or validating and affirming, like, I can only imagine how hard this must be. I can only imagine what you must be going through right now. So I think a lot of that can be helpful for reassurance too. So curiosity, openness, kindness, withholding judgment. I think that it's like, goes without saying, it seems, but like the pharmacy tech example or like the psychiatrist example that I shared earlier, I think that can often be overlooked, or, it is simple in practice, but it can be overlooked, or it can, cannot be overstated how important it is to be careful with our words and with our language, and words do matter in how we talk with people. So that's something that I would leave with folks and how to support others.
Thank you so much, Dr. Yang, for your generosity of time and knowledge and encouragement for all of us today. Thank you, everyone, for joining, and I hope you got as much out of this presentation as I did. I really, really enjoyed and benefited from hearing your story, Dr. Yang, and hearing the wisdom that you've learned from your experience and from your training. And I just really can't thank you enough for sharing so openly and wisely with us. We will send the presentation recording when it's ready to everyone who registered, and we'll also be posting it on our website. So if you want to come back to it, it's a wonderful wealth of information. It will be available for you. Dr. Yang, thank you so much. Is there anything else you'd like to share as a parting note?
Just, be well, everyone. Take good care of yourselves. If you'd like to learn information about DBSA, we are online on Instagram, and we have our website, dbsalliance.org. If you'd like to learn more about PsyChi on your campus and in your community, please do look for them online as well. And you can follow me on Instagram for more content and education that I've shared today. So thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. Thanks, Dr. Yang. Thanks, everyone. Have a great rest of your day.